Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about PC setups, about the positioning of peripherals, and we're going to also be talking about some little tricks you can use in League to make your FPS better or lower input lag or something. And we're also going to talk about some little tricks for clicking and what to focus on for clicking. This is going to be kind of an introduction video, and in the next video on this topic, aka on, let's say, the mechanical aspects of League, we're actually going to be looking at some ideas of mechanical things, I suppose. So if we get right into it, the first things I want to mention are very quickly out of the way. The only PC parts that matter in League are CPU, RAM, and SSD. These are your actual FPS parts. The CPU and the RAM are going to be actually giving you FPS, even if you have a 10-year-old GPU or you have no GPU and you're running the game from your CPU's integrated graphics, you're probably going to get the same FPS. I'm not sure about the integrated graphics getting the same FPS. You might get a bit less, but even if you have a 10-year-old GPU, you will get the same FPS as if you had like a decent GPU or a good one. This game does not need a GPU. It really does not matter, as long as you have like the bare minimum. The SSD won't really contribute to your FPS so much, but it will prevent you from getting stutters. If you're getting stutters in League, but you have decent FPS, then that is going to be because of your SSD. Or HDD if you use that, I suppose. Ideally, you just get an M.2 drive here, but I don't know. If you can't, then an SSD is fine as well. But if you're not getting stutters, then you don't really need to worry about this part. Then I want to mention a trick. So if you actually uncap your FPS in League, and you actually get more than 240 FPS, then capping it in Viva Tuner, this program, will actually make your FPS better, because it's going to, I don't know, request more resources or whatever. Doesn't really matter. Either way, it's going to most likely make your FPS better. Even if it doesn't, you can achieve low latency VSync with this. And there are YouTube tutorials that can show you how to do that. And if you're interested in that, you can just look that up. Okay. And if we get right into the actual peripheral parts, right? And the reason I want to talk about these things is because, firstly, if you're actually someone that's maybe interested in, at some point, upgrading your PC or buying new parts, and you mainly play League, then this can help you out. Secondly, if you're someone who is not sure if some of your stuff is actually holding you back, then, I mean, it's not going to be holding you back, but whether it is handicapping you by a decent margin. There are some things that can handicap you a decent amount in League, and then there are some things that just really are kind of just luxury. But then you can also climb on pretty much anything. I'm just saying that it's obviously going to be a disadvantage when climbing, right? And lastly, if you're just interested in the topic and you don't really want to do your own research, because you would have to research into each part and you would have to research like what works with League and whatever, and it's kind of just pointless for most people to do. But I want everyone to kind of have the idea of where I'm coming from when I actually talk about things that I want to be done in terms of mechanics, right? So if something is handicapping you, then obviously you're going to have a harder time creating some mechanical concept in League than if those things were not handicapping you, right? As in the example of having a very small mouse pad is going to force you to have a pretty high sensitivity, which is going to make your accuracy worse. Very simple, right? And if you're playing attack damage carry, aka ADC, as your role, then having a very high sensitivity is going to generally be a disadvantage for you. Well, so if you get into this, for the monitor, you're going to want to look at a few things. Firstly, this is like a bonus thing. You are going to want to check in NVIDIA control panel, if you have that your monitor actually says like PC and then it says native, right? In brackets, it just needs to say native. So your monitor is on the native resolution while being highest refresh rate, and that's good then. Being on non-native can add some input lag, so don't really want to deal with that. And generally, it's recommended to run it at native if you can, right? If you're running it at this resolution anyway. So for sizes, we're going to really only want monitors that are either 24 or 27 inches. Why do we want that? Very simple, because if you get a 32-inch monitor or more, then what's going to happen is you're going to see more of the screen, right? So imagine both left and right side, right? You can see more stuff, but the problem is now you need to move your mouse way further. And having to move your mouse way further is going to make it very difficult for you to, let's say, move your camera as you want, right? And what it's also going to do is displace your mouse more from the middle of the screen when you're actually trying to move your camera than if you had a lower resolution. And middle of the screen is where you generally want your mouse to be in League for most of the time. And also, on top of that, it's going to make it so you want your monitor to be even further away because you want to be seeing all of your monitor at all times in League, because not being able to do that is a disadvantage. Why? Because you don't want to even have to move anything, whether it be your head or your eyes, for you to see the minimap and also see like skill shot and stuff, right? It does depend though what role you play, because for example, as a top laner, it can be a lot more beneficial for you to have your monitor closer compared to, say, something like an ADC. The more range, or rather effective range your character has, the more beneficial it might be to move it further back. That is because you're going to be able to see more of your screen, which means you're seeing more of your effective range, and you're also seeing more of where things are actually going to be coming at you from. On the other hand, when you're playing a more melee or diving or whatever character, you're going to be more able to focus on the middle of your screen if you want, because you are the one diving in and actually trying to execute the fight in detail, right? So it's just a matter of where the important things are going to happen. But generally, in League, it's going to be something around 60 to 100 centimeters monitor distance that you're going to want from yourself, because otherwise you're forced to permanently move your eyes and your head, which can work for you. There are some people, for example, some Korean top laners that shall not be named, that play with their monitor in their face. Of course you can, but for most people it's going to be a disadvantage. Then these things are very good to look up on the site. The site in general is quite useful. The site is ratings.com, and it just gives you a bunch of stats for monitors, for mice, for such things, right? So here, for example, we have the stats for an OLED panel, right? A very good OLED panel right now that has these kinds of delays, right? So it's like point something milliseconds, right? No matter what the color change is. So that's going to mean that if something occurs, right, then the pixel will actually change color in that time. While, say, on other types of panels, it'll take, say, a millisecond or two, right? Which is not really a long time, but as you go down and down in terms of tiers of monitors, it can get to like 20 milliseconds, 30, and so on, right? And it can start to like really add up. So generally in these things, it's not really about maximizing your, let's say, efficiency. Obviously, I do believe that an OLED panel with a decent refresh rate would be the ideal for League if you actually had unlimited money, but that is really not necessary. What you have to do is just get something like, or well, you don't have to, but what you want to do for to even the playing ground in terms of competition is get something around like 144 hertz, maybe 240 if you're really feeling it. And then you just get like a simple panel that has a decent response time and you're chilling. The thing here is that you want to just eliminate all the things that can be issues rather than maximizing your, let's say, advantage or something. It really doesn't matter that much in League, but for example, if you're running a 60 hertz monitor that also has a decent amount of, let's say, delay in response time, then you're going to end up in a position where you see things later and it's going to be disadvantageous. The tricky thing with League and setups, though, is that in general on League, with setups, you will have very different requirements and wants based on what your role actually is and your character. Someone who's playing an ADC is going to want very different things than someone who's playing jungle, for example. And someone who's playing Ezreal is definitely going to want very different things than someone who's playing Garen, right? It's going to be very different based on those things. And why is it going to be very different? Well, if you're an ADC, then having a better setup is going to be much more advantageous than if you're a jungler generally, because on ADC you are going to be wanting to react more, wanting to do more spacing, more dodging, more such things. Of course, on jungle and stuff, it's also the same, but there is a lot more nuance in terms of ADCs playing that out, because in the ADC role, if you can actually react to certain things, then it's a very big advantage because you're going to avoid them every time or outplay them every time. While in jungle, having a good, let's say, understanding of the game is going to be much more important. And then you can add some mind games and such, and you will get a very passable, let's say, mechanical level, right? Then for mice, what's really important is the sensor, so that's like accurate, right? And then the switches, you want like really spammable and really light switches for League, because in League, having the ability to click, let's say, at least like 6 times per second is going to be very beneficial, because that's going to allow you to do wiggles, that's going to allow you to be much harder to read in terms of movement, and that's also going to allow you to maximize your inputs when you're trying to DPS and such, right? And also shape, if here, so I already loaded in like a few mice that are quite popular with pros. So a lot of pros just use like these mice. There are like a few others that they use, but you have to also keep in mind that some of the mice that they're going to be using in general, pro players in different games, are going to be because they are sponsored by the company. But these ones are very prevalent in League if you check pro player settings. And if you notice, the actual dimensions of the mice and the actual shapes are somewhat similar. So what I would, if I had to guess, right, I would say that these two mice are probably being used with a claw grip, most likely. And what they're doing here is just placing their palm here and having their fingers here, right? And with either a claw grip or a palm grip, it's going to be quite beneficial for you to try to sort of pull your fingers into the mouse, or rather into your palm, right? So that they are kind of pre-applying pressure on your mouse's buttons, which will then make you both able to click faster in terms of the delay before you click, and it's also going to make you be able to click faster in terms of how many times you click per second. Then this other mouse, I believe the Razer Rock V2 Pro, is, I mean, they might still be using it with claw, which is fine as well, but they are likely also using it with fingertip, because that's probably why they would get this, because it's smaller than the other ones. Though, I mean, could be either one. Though I will say the only exception for that rule that I said is the fingertip, where you would most likely want to position your fingers so that they are more tensed and they have a higher angle and they point into the actual button rather than pointing away from the button and you using your fingers to tension it. Here you just want to point towards it and click it that way, right? And that's going to be the most advantageous way to do it. Okay. So then we have mouse pads. Do you need a mouse pad? No. I climbed to, I don't know, decent elos with every role while not even using a mouse pad. You don't need to have one. I mean, it's obviously going to depend on your desk and stuff, but you don't need one. But it's going to make it much easier and it's going to make it much more consistent. No matter what, if you are playing on a desk, it's just like that. Unless your desk is really specific and it's just really good for tracking and stuff, is going to always be somewhat inconsistent. For sizes, you are again going to be bound by your role, because, okay, so with DPI in League, right, the more skill shots your champion has, the better it's going to be for you to have a higher DPI. That's going to be because you are able to do something and then instantly do something else, which is going to hide your intentions. On top of that, it's also going to allow you to do things faster. On top of that, it's also going to allow you to place your mouse behind the enemy easier. If I actually... Do you have Paint open? No. Okay, that's fine. Epic Games. Epic pen. It's fine. Okay, epic pen. So let's say that this is your target, right? If we say that this is your skill shot, right? And like the places where you can place them, right? You can see that this arc is going to be much smaller than this arc. So if you actually have a higher DPI, then you're more likely to end up in this arc and faster. And that means that you are not required to be as accurate as when you are here. Like 1 pixel here will end up being like a few pixels here, right? But 1 pixel here will end up being less than 1 pixel here in terms of actual change in trajectory when you are moving your cursor by 1 pixel, which means that it is more forgiving for you to actually shoot your skill shot behind the enemy. If your character is point and click and melee or something, then it's going to be also pretty good for you to get a high DPI. The reason being because on melee characters it doesn't really matter that much, and just being able to do things quickly is going to be quite good for you anyway, but you maybe don't want as high of a DPI as, for example, a mage, especially if you're something that is somewhat mechanical anyway. I don't know, Camille or Ruin or something. But then lastly, if you're an ADC or something, then you're probably going to want a lower DPI. Why is that? Well, because on this role, you're going to be looking to click pretty precisely and quickly, and it's going to be quite important for you. And rather than being able to do something like this, right? Or just being like you having your mouse here because your character is here, then moving, and then clicking somewhere in this radius where it's going to still be pretty chill to click, you're going to need to do like this flick always, right? And back. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you like hit it every time, but it's going to be much better if you do have the ability to click on the enemy rather than relying on your attack move setting, right? Obviously, you will use attack move, but you just don't want to rely on that and have like every click be a misclick. It's pretty bad, right? Similarly, you're going to want to be pretty accurate with where you are clicking when you're actually clicking to move. So yeah, those things are going to make it so that you're going to want a different DPI based on the role you play, and a different DPI will make it so that a different mousepad size is viable. Then for types of mousepads, you have this spreadsheet. It's called Mousepad Master Sheet by Hoya. And here you have a bunch of mousepads. And in general, for League, it's going to be ideal for you to get something on this side. And that's going to be because, as we said, you want a higher DPI for most things in League, right? In general, League is a game that you're going to be playing with a higher sensitivity than something like a shooter game. And that's going to mean that you getting any kind of stopping power, right? So you having your mouse move from here to here and getting stopping power as you do that, so that you are then really stable and you can move it again or something, right? Is going to be very beneficial for you. Whereas getting a mousepad that is able to provide you with speed is not going to be so beneficial because you don't really care about moving your mouse like this, right? In League, you're going to move your mouse like this, right? So you being able to stop is going to be very beneficial for you, as I said. So that kind of sums up your mousepad choices, right? Obviously, even if that is not what you choose, right, you can still get like any of these mousepads, right? And just go through it and say like, oh, well, I just have a mousepad so there's a consistent surface, and it's still going to be plenty good, right? Even if you have a cheaper mousepad and it's not like one of these ones are going to oftentimes end up costing you, say like, I don't know, 20, 30 euro, maybe 40. Maybe you have to import it if you want a specific one, and it's going to cost you more. But generally, you can get a pretty good mousepad for, say, 20, 30, whatever. If not, you can also just pick up a 5 or 10 euro or something mousepad from the store, but those ones aren't going to make much of a difference compared to the desk, but they are going to be a bit more consistent. So it's still like, okay, pretty decent. That's like the worst case scenario. If you have to play on the desk, that's fine as well. It's just going to be a small disadvantage, right? Like all of these things are not a necessity. They are just things which don't make you have a disadvantage, right? It's not even an advantage. It's just not having, I mean, I guess not having a disadvantage is in its nature an advantage, but most players are going to have like these things at least somewhat sorted, so it's not going to be like much of a pay to win. It's just don't not pay to lose, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, desk chair, just adjustable would be ideal. If it's not adjustable, that's fine. Really, really, really highly recommend here that you check out videos from the FPS community where they post these videos on posture, how they sit, how they hold their mouse, and so on, because these things are going to help you a lot, because the three things that really matter for League are speed of action, accuracy of action, and then intent of action. Intent of action is going to come from your actual game sense, your actual intent in the game, like how you trained yourself to actually have purpose behind each click that you're trying to do. But accuracy and speed are literally just going to be the same thing that the people that are aim training are trying to do for their FPS game, but they're trying to do it in a 3D space and you're trying to do it in a 2D space. So that's really the only difference. So the things that they make are going to be very beneficial to you as long as you apply them to yourself. And that can give you a big edge over other people who play League, because in general, people who play League don't care that much about their setup. They don't care that much about their posture and stuff. And they don't care that much about their, say, mechanical skill, right? I mean, they like it. They do care somewhat about it, right? They think it's cool when you're mechanically good, but no one really in League like thinks to themselves like, I'm going to isolate this and I'm going to focus on mechanics like this, right? And so on. And it's generally just like, well, I just played a lot and now I'm like pretty decent mechanically, or I mean, I'm not that good mechanically, but it's fine. I have a good macro. And that's largely because of this focus on macro that's developed over the years, and League also being a more strategy kind of game, I guess. It is focused on strategy a bit more, but there's a bit of an over focus on strategy in League because there's still a lot you can do with other stuff, but people generally try to compensate with pure macro, which is fine. Developing mechanics can take a long time, and if you have the option of going the macro route, then that's fine as well if you don't have time. Okay, then keyboards. Really important thing here is just literally just go same site that I opened before and just check the latency of keys, because you don't want latency on your keys, right? Like you really don't want latency on your keyboard. Like that sucks. You press S and it takes like 10, 20, 30 milliseconds for the character to actually stop or attack move or a spell, right? For example, one of my friends had a keyboard with 2 times the latency of the keyboard I had. I had, for example, this keyboard, right? And it had like pretty bad latency, but it's not like completely unplayable. He had like 2 times the latency of this keyboard. And when that guy actually swapped his keyboard to another keyboard, he was literally clicking the button, right? To use a spell. And then he would move the mouse, right? Because on his old keyboard, he actually had time to move the mouse after clicking his button, right? Because it was that delayed. And you really don't want that. That is not going to be good for you, because then you're going to be leaning even more into predicting rather than being able to react, and then you're just compensating for the things that are out of place. Okay, then really quickly about features of keyboards like booting, because they might be like interesting if you are actually someone who likes FPS games. I tried these things out, and the acceleration point, acceleration point setting is quite good. You do get a slight advantage if you can set your acceleration to say like 0.1 or 0.5 or something. That's like preferable for you, but most gaming keyboards are going to have an acceleration point of around 1 millimeter, which is completely fine and without real issues, especially if you're not extremely controlled with how you're clicking stuff. So you're going to end up having a hard time getting any benefit out of it if you're not extremely controlled with it. And the other actual features that are the features that people like these keyboards for, say things like rapid trigger or whatever, are pointless in League, basically. There are some exceptions on champions where they can be useful, but the advantage you get is either completely negligible or it's extremely minor, maybe like, I don't know, like maybe it could increase your win rate by 0.1% in 100 games or something. It's really, really negligible. Then for this, for optimization of input delay, you can just watch some YouTube videos. There are plenty of them. Just make sure you get that sorted. And monitor settings, same thing, but you also want to check your maker, right? Okay, then we can get into the actual like leak things, right? So there are like a few leak things, and then we can end the video, because this is just an introduction for the next one, so that I have a baseline that's kind of easy to understand. So, okay, clicking, I mentioned this with finger placement and pressure, right? Then you have like the grips, right? The different grips. You can find whatever works for you. Generally though, for league, it's going to be best to either be on claw or on fingertip. Fingertip is technically quite good in terms of control in league. It's probably the best for the type of control you want in league, but it doesn't let you do the fingertip pressure. So then it doesn't let you click as well. So one of them just has better clicking, one of them just has better control. So they are both pretty much really good. And I wouldn't recommend using a palm grip in league. So I would avoid that. Reason being because it will both make your click slower and it will make your actual ability to move the mouse slower, unless you raise your DPI compared to the other ones. And these things, the actual like grips that you prefer, are going to determine the kind of shape you want. So this is what I wanted to mention as well. A really good thing about a mouse like the G Pro Superlight is that you can see this hump in the back, right? That's quite important for you. You're going to really want to think about how you want to hold your mouse, right? Like whenever you are getting a mouse or replacing a mouse, or if you have a mouse, right? You want to think about like what kind of mouse you want to get for your grip and what kind of grip you want to use for the mouse you do have. So here you have like this little hump, right? That's kind of vertical, right? And that allows you to say, have your hand be like this, right? And to actually make contact right here. And your hand making contact right here will then make it so that if your fingers are like this, right? Say that your finger is like this, right? And it's pulling with force in this direction, right? It's going to pull into your palm, and this is going to be a steady anchor for you, while this is able to be a second point of control and is going to be much easier to click. In other scenarios, say this mouse that I tried, you have, say, a hump like this, right? So here, it should be pretty obvious that you're not going to be able to really anchor your palm as easily, right? Like, see, there is no real anchor point here. It's like you can rest your palm on this, but it's like an anchor point, right? Because you can actually dig your palm into this, right? Rather than having it rest on this. So then you are not able to do that as well, right? So then you just don't have as much pressure like this. And also because the buttons are positioned like this here, right? And here they are more straight, you will also have a harder time with applying this kind of directional force. And these things are ones you want to kind of think about if like league is very important to you and your performance in league. Okay. And then there's like some quick things on setups. So for setups, it's advantageous to have your mouse and keyboard close to each other. So in this case, you probably put your keyboard next to the mouse pad. It's also somewhat advantageous to have the setup be off center, so you don't have yourself sit exactly in the center of it, but rather it's better for you if you have your keyboard more to the side, and then you have your mouse pad and mouse more to the center. And then if you can align those with your monitor, it's going to be much easier for you to do things. This is basically just how your brain interprets, let's say, syncing all of these things up. So your movement of the mouse, you're actually like clicking, the movement on the monitor, and also the clicking on the keyboard, right? So how it syncs everything up together. I already mentioned monitor distance, and lastly we just have like the height of the monitors and the positioning, right? So that you are then tilting your way in a certain way. Ideally, head tilt is just slightly down where you look up with your eyes, because that's also slightly advantageous compared to looking down. And that's really the last thing. Today we didn't really have many things on League, but we did have many things on the setup. I hope you found it interesting, or you learned something new, or something that's useful to you. And next time I will actually go into something that is more League and mechanics based, right? I will also link these sites, so say like this site, and the spreadsheet in the comments, and you can check that out if you want. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.